everyone, welcome back. This is Will from PDH Commander, and today we're going to be talking about Pauper EDH deck tech. And today for you, we got a pretty interesting one with Indulgent Aristocrat. So Indulgent Aristocrat is a 1-mana vampire noble that has lifelink with the unique ability of pay 2, sacrifice a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on each other vampire you control, and it's a 1/1, so that plays into a lot of really interesting aspects. First off, it's a 1-mana creature, and if you really think about it, at the very least, you can function it as a disposable sorcery spell. You can essentially give 3 mana, put a +1/+1 pump on your entire team for, at the very least, a going wide strategy. So in terms of the way we're going to strategize and build this deck is a very straightforward strategy. It's going to be focusing on a vampire tribal deck in which we're focusing on cheap vampires that we can dump out that can be disposable in every time they enter the battlefield. They generate some form of effect or they have recursive abilities. We're going to have creatures that on entering, they draw us a card and then we lose 1 life, either dealing damage to the opponents or becoming some sort of complete nuisance in the board state, as well as recursive creatures. So from what we can see here, we got a couple simple examples that we're going to be including in our deck, such as Dusk Legion Zealot, a 2-mana creature, Vampire Soldier. When Dusk Legion Zealot enters the battlefield, you draw a card, lose 1 life. You can always then just sacrifice this Dusk Legion Zealot to the Indulgent Aristocrat to give a +1/+1 pump to your other creatures. Stormcloak Mentor can function more as our body on the field, where when it enters, you can put a +1/+1 counter on another target vampire, potentially your commander, as well as Vampire Spawn that has, when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2. So we can also include some of these life drain effects. We add several recursive effects into the deck, such as Arrogant Outlaw, that is a 3-mana creature, 3/2, that can function a similar effect when it enters the battlefield. You're draining each opponent for 2 life, and you're gaining that 2 life back, which can be really, really powerful, especially in a 4-player game. You're essentially dealing 6 just on playing a 3-mana creature, and you can always sack it afterwards. Bat Whisperer can, if you have one of those cards be played, or you able to ping some damage off, you can then create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying on ETB that can still provide some evasive damage to continue these other effects. And another big bomb in the deck, if you can let it stay on the board for a while, is the Savage Gorger, which is a flying at the beginning of your end step. If an opponent lost life this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Savage Gorger. So these really incremental effects can go down farther. And like I said before, you don't need all of them to stay on the board. As long as you're able to consistently activate your commander, all of them will gradually get larger. And to synergize with this, to consistently get this damage output onto your opponents, even if they have blockers, you can introduce other cards such as Pulse Tracker, which is a 1-mana creature that has, whenever it attacks, each opponent loses 1 life. So regardless of the block, you're still going to be pinging for that 1 damage to activate some of your other ETB effects. Vampire Neonate can also have this passive damage where for 2 mana, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. As a 0/1, it can be a nice little blocker against 2/2s incoming. And a nice non-vampire that we're including in this deck is Haggard Constrictor. So Haggard Constrictor, when it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters, and each creature you control with +1/+1 on it now has Menace. So if you toss out Haggard Constrictor late game, activated Indulgent Aristocrat's abilities a few times, you now have multiple creatures on the board that have these +1/+1s. Everyone now becomes a higher degree of evasiveness. As we are vampires, the most obvious aspect of many vampires is their lifelink keyword on top of them. And so using cards such as Marauding Bright Priest and Epicure of Blood, we can synergize with this life gain that we're constantly doing to provide consistent passive damage to our opponents, where whenever you gain 1 life, each opponent loses 1 life, as well as Falcon Wrath Noble, a very powerful vampire to include in any Pauper deck, is whenever it or another creature dies, doesn't have to be under your control, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this can be really powerful, and with constantly sacrificing your own creatures is extremely powerful in this kind of deck. And as I said, while we're sacrificing many creatures, That means our graveyard's going to be full of creatures that we'd want to recur. So using cards such as Bone Harvest, Footbottom Feast, and Grave Purge all have the similar functional aspect of putting any number of target creature cards from your graveyard on top of your library, and then you can draw a card. So you're basically stacking your deck with as many disposable creature cards, and you can pair this with putting first Dusk Legion Zealot on top. So you draw a card, you play Dusk Legion Zealot, you lose 1 life, you draw another card, you then get to play another creature. So you can really, I wouldn't say combo off, but you can have a nice consistent multiple creatures come into play in that single turn and be quickly sacked out to your commander. In addition to this, we also have Forever Young and Driver of the Dead, which can Driver of the Dead has return target creature card from with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So these are really powerful recursive abilities in an obvious self-sacrifice deck. Can really go a long way of maintaining or filling your hand back up with creatures after you completely empty out. And obviously you're going to then have a couple easy, quick removal spells in this deck, because as many of these are smaller creatures, you're going to want to have a way to clear the way for your creatures to make contact. While even though some of them are flyers, you're going to want to include Deathstroke, destroy target tapped creature. So as soon as one of the big guys comes through, it's a very cheap 2 mana kill spell. I also like to include Defeat. It's nice to remove some of those 0/5 blockers or some of the more mana nerd or technical creatures. And a nice Daring Demolition can either remove a target creature or from the new Kamigawa sets, destroy any of the potential vehicles they could be including. In addition to this, you'd also want to have a nice include is Feed the Swarm with lifelink in play for most of your creatures. The loss of life equal to the permanent's mana cost doesn't really have a big impact, so this can be a nice removal either for target creature or potential enchantments that are really controlling the board for your opponent. And I like to also include Certain Death, destroy target creature, and you can have a nice little bit of mana life gain off of it. So that's our deck for the Indulgent Aristocrat, a 1 mana commander that has a nice, really strong, powerful vampire effect. As I said before, this is primarily vampire tribal, so we keep it up to about 38 creatures in the deck to consistently be drawing into our vampires to activate our commander's effect. And that's really padded with some of the sorceries in instance for either recurring our graveyard or for removal spells to keep the board clear. You can see in terms of the mana cost, we're floating roughly around 3 for the mana cost to have a nice tempo aggro style. And in terms of the price, it floats around $12 from TCG. So this is a relatively budget deck within Pauper, and you can check the deck list down below.